where a critical incident report is not completed and sent over to the OIG for allegations of sexual abuse involving these children. On the other hand, probation is already sending the OIG's office critical incident reports for all incidents of alleged sexual abuse involving juvenile probationers, a reporting process that is also codified by LB 1078. And I want to say again that the Department of Health and Human Services did accept some of the recommendations, and I appreciate their work on those recommendations that they have accepted. Frankly, sexual abuse allegations involving children in state custody is not a clear data point that's being collected. That means there's no quick and efficient way to pull information on the number of sexual abuse allegations made in a certain time period involving children in the state care. This also means we can't tell if this number is increasing and we need to be alarmed, or decreasing, perhaps because of new measures and new improvements, quality improvements that have been put in place by the department. LB 1078 will require the department to create a documentation process that clearly indicates when a victim of sexual abuse allegations is a state ward or in state care. It is critical that the department and the OIG's office have access to timely and accurate information about the frequency of these allegations. This data can then be monitored to identify patterns and implement necessary interventions if a systemic problem is identified, or again, identify if we're moving in a very positive direction so we know which steps that we're taking are working. LB 1078 also ensures that the number of sexual abuse allegations that occurred for children being served by the Division of Children and Family Services or placed at a residential child caring agency be shared with the Health and Human Services Committee of the Legislature in the department's annual report. This includes allegations made in residential facilities licensed by Public Health. It is important that this data be shared on an annual basis to allow the Committee for Health and Human Services to conduct our annual accountability and oversight functions. In conversations with the department about this bill, they acknowledge they are already tracking this data but would need to modify their existing internal processes to get the data in a centralized format that could be easily analyzed and shared. LB 1078 simply requires that the information be shared and allows DHHS the flexibility to determine what internal process is best to collect and distribute this information using existing resources. LB 1078 will allow the department and the Office of Inspector General's office to analyze in real time the number of sexual abuse allegations being reported that involve children in the state's care. When vulnerable children are being abused on our watch, we as a state must respond to the systemic shortcomings that allowed these tragic incidents to occur and put safeguards in place to ensure children are better protected moving forward. Access to critical information about sexual abuse allegations reported to the DHHS will ensure that the legislature is able to appropriately respond with meaningful policy and budget changes that strengthen Nebraska's child welfare system. LB 1078 was voted out by the Exec Board on a 6-0 vote, and there was no opposition. And again, I thank the Executive Board for the priority. With that, colleagues, I encourage you to vote green on LB 1078. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Crawford. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Chambers would move to bracket the bill until April 18 of 2018.
Senator Chambers, you're welcome to open on your bracket.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, as I said when I started this morning, the promise I made to the Speaker was that I would put a motion on every bill. I didn't say I would take up and argue every motion. I didn't say I wanted to kill any bill. In fact, I stated the contrary. Also, circumstances alter cases. What happened this morning on that other bill was very upsetting to me. But I think that it might serve a worthwhile purpose because some people were exposed for what they really are. This is a bill which should not be entangled in any of the side issues that may be here. But there is an article that I'm going to read into the record because for a black person, it's extremely important. And since I'm the only one currently on the floor, I have an obligation to read it. And then I'll withdraw my motion. It was in this morning's World Herald. There's an expression, one drop of black blood will make somebody who is otherwise white black. We are viewed as a contamination. And we used to say in the old days, the thing that will hurt a white person more than anything else is to find out that he or she is black. See, black in this society doesn't refer to color. It's an ideological, it's a sociological, it's a psychological, it's a cultural designation, and it is a term of art that means nothing because there's no way my mother could have been deemed black based on her color. She could sit up there with those pages and accept that she's older, she'd blend right in with them. Her hair was red though and her eyes were hazel. But I insist that she was not white. The headline, well, first above it, DNA testing, a clash of science and racial identity. As more, this is from the Washington Post, reprinted in the World Herald today. As more Americans take advantage of genetic testing to pinpoint the makeup of their DNA, the technology is coming head to head with the country's deep-rooted obsession with race and racial myths. This is perhaps no more true than for the growing number of self-identified European Americans who learn they are actually part African. For those who are surprised by their genetic heritage, the new information can often set into motion a complicated recalibration of how they view their identity. Nicole Persley, P-E-R-S-L-E-Y, who grew up in Nokesville, Tennessee, Virginia, was stunned to learn that she is part African. She was, as she recalls, quote, basically raised a Southern white girl, unquote. But as a student at the University of Michigan, quoting a quote from her, my roommate was black, my friends were black, I was dating a black man, unquote, and they saw something different in her facial features and hair. Quote, I was constantly being asked, what are you? What's your ethnic background? While the African Americans generally assume that they may carry non-African DNA dating back to sexual relations between masters and slaves, many white, including white presidents, who, if they did it today, would go to prison as they should, or have something worse done to them. And don't tell me presidents wouldn't do it. You see all these strong and powerful white men doing what they're doing now in what you call modern times. Sexual relations between masters and slaves. There were sexual relations, by the way, between mistresses and slaves also. Many white Americans, like Persley, grow up believing that their ancestry is fully European. It has become increasingly easy to receive an assessment of one's genetic makeup. Companies such as 23andMe and Ancestry.com provide a list of countries or regions where the predominant genetic traits match those of one's forebears. In parentheses, there is no DNA category for race because a genetic marker for it does not exist, close parenthesis. In recent years, multiracial Americans have increasingly entered the national consciousness. So from 2010 to 2016, those who identify as being of two or more races grew by 24%, a jump that could have had as much to do with the changing way in which Americans identify themselves as an actual increase in the racially mixed population. But when the mixing happened several generations back, it can take people by surprise. A 2014 study by 23andMe customers found that roughly 3.5% of 148,789 self-identified European Americans had 1% or more of African ancestry, more than that proverbial one drop, so you know what they were. That means they had a probable black ancestor going back about 6 generations or fewer. The discovery elicits a range of emotions. At the DNA Discussion Project, an initiative that surveys people about their perceptions of their genetic makeup before and after DNA tests, 80% of the 3,000-odd people they have so far surveyed self-identify as white. Of those, 2/3 see themselves as only one race, and they are more likely to be unhappy with their test results than those who identify as mixed or other races. But for some, white identity trumps DNA. If the test result is too disruptive to their sense of self, they may rationalize it away. One white supremacist who discovered he had African DNA claimed on the white nationalist website Stormfront.com that the testing company was part of a Jewish conspiracy to, quote, defame, confuse, and deracinate young whites on a mass level, unquote. It defames a white person to know that he's got in him what I got in me. Nothing should make him prouder. Continuing. Members of white nationalist groups have advised those who discover non-Aryan heritage to rely more on genealogy or the mirror test, as quoted in a sociological study of Stormfront members discussing ancestry test results. When you look in the mirror, do you see a Jew? If not, you're good, one commentator wrote. Quote, for me, the #1 takeaway is how easily people reject science, unquote, said Anita Foeman, F-O-E-M-A-N, who co-directs the DNA Discussion Project. Quote, many whites would get a news story and say, I'm still going to call myself white, or I'm still going to call myself Italian. I wonder if an Italian I've been talking about found out something about his DNA, and that's why he's so defensive around here. I'm going to stop talking about Brother